I've been producing now for well over 10 years, and I've been producing professionally for over 8 years. And every day I come into the studio, I still learn something new. I learn tips or tricks or techniques that I've never utilized. I learn new workflow hacks. So I wanted to make a video showing you some of my favorite recent tips and tricks that I've really started incorporating heavily and kind of highlighting them. So if you want to try them, if you have heard of them but just always forget to incorporate them, let this video be an eye-opener or a reminder to check out some of these things we're going to talk about. I'm going to show you a bunch of stuff in just a second, but before we do, my name is Austin. You're watching Make Pop Music. If you like this video, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. We do videos like this every single Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, so make sure that you don't miss them. Also, if you want a chance to win a sample pack, preset pack, MIDI pack, or loop pack from our website, makepopmusic.com, all you have to do is leave a comment on this video within the first 72 hours of when it's published. We will pick the winner on the following Wednesday on our Instagram, Make Pop Music. And if you want to check out our website for all of our other free and paid content, it's at makepopmusic.com. There's links for everything in the description. Now, let's dive in so we can talk about some of these workflow hacks. The first thing that I want to talk about is actually using some kind of monitoring chain when you're tracking vocals, or say you're tracking guitar and you want to listen back with an amp sim. It's really, really good for whoever's performing, whether that's a vocalist or a guitarist, to be able to hear something that kind of reflects what the vision of that, source is going to be in a final mix. We all have interfaces that have some kind of console like this. I'm using RME, and in RME, you can route it to where you can listen back to the dry signal in your headphones. It's really cool for just like source monitoring. You can even add a couple cool little effects like EQ and dynamics, and there is a little delay and reverb on here, but it's not anywhere near what I would like. And some interfaces literally only have a knob to blend back the dry signal. But what you can do is no matter what DAW you're in, or no matter what interface you're using, you can set up your DAW to actually allow you to monitor a vocal or a guitar or any other source in real time with no latency. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is open your DAW or your interface settings, and you're going to go to your buffer size. Typically, the smaller the number, the less latency that you're going to introduce. I'll actually probably select 128, but typically as long as you're 192 or smaller, you're not going to have a ton of latency. If you're doing a mix project that has tons of virtual instruments and tons of inserts and effects and crazy master bus processing, you might have to up this because the larger the number, typically the more CPU you can use and the more efficient your computer is going to run. But when I'm tracking vocals, and to be honest, I have a really good computer, so most of the time I'm 192 or lower. I'm going to leave it on 128 for right now. And what I'm going to show you is basically in Cubase or any other DAW, there is this little button right here. And if you select this little button, you can monitor back your signal. Hey. But as you can tell right now, there's a bit of an echo still. Even though we have a low buffer size, we're still getting some latency. And the reason that's happening is because it's going through my vocal bus, it's going through all of my other routing, and it's going through my master bus, which has some plugins on it. These are typically things that I produce through, they're things that I track through, and so I might not want to remove all of this, but they are adding a ton of latency. One thing that you should do, and I do this for basically every little monitoring chain that I do, is I go to my outputs and I'm just going to select monitors out. It's basically going to bypass the master bus. It's going to bypass any of the vocal bus processing, any of the send bus processing. I don't really need that. I literally just want this to allow me to add inserts so I can listen back. So now that I've done that, and so now I'm not getting any latency when I speak into this. This is going to be real time, and what this is going to allow me to do is load in plugins. So if we go over here, I can do things like load Auto-Tune. I can put this to a key, and I can do whatever I want. Now it's going to tune my vocal. It's going to do it in real time with basically no latency. If it is adding latency, you can always use like an Auto-Tune Artist or an Auto-Tune EFX. And then other than that, we can add a little bit of EQ. Say I want to brighten this up. Say I want to make this a little bit more controlled in the low mids. We could add something like a compressor. So I'm going to do a compressor and also has a little bit of gate in it. So it'll just kind of push that vocal forward for me. I could even add something like a de-esser in here if, let's say, the vocals are poking me right in the ear. So right now, I'm going to have this right around here. We'll have it right around here. Check, check, check. Hey. There we go. And then the next thing is I can throw on some kind of reverb, and I'll put the mix low. I'm just going to use this as an insert. But now if I put my headphones on, now I have a whole chain. I can track through this entire chain, no latency. It's going to sound great. If I take everything off, it's all the same. What's really cool about this too is that I can just leave this as a monitoring chain tracking like this, but as I record my vocals, I can just record them to my main vocal track. So I can still monitor from here, but let's arm my lead vocal. Check, check, hey, 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 mic check 1, 2, hey, hey, hey. I'm monitoring, if I turn everything on, I'm monitoring with all of my inserts, but I can go back to my lead vocal track and I can track on whatever lane I want to with no latency. It's super nice, and just by selecting that little button and then selecting monitors out instead of whatever your kind of main output through your DAW is, gets rid of all of the latency as long as your buffer size is decently low. One thing that I will also say is I typically will use a stereo channel for this, because if I add things like modulation or reverb or delay, I want that to be a stereo sound. So technically I'm routing this in with a mono source, my RME mic input 1, but it is a stereo track so I can play back stereo effects. So that's the first thing that I'm doing. I'm monitoring with all of that. The other thing is I've basically set it up the same way with the guitar input. So if I go to my guitar monitor, we're going straight out to my monitors here. And if I engage that, now I can track through this pedal, or I can track monitoring with this pedal. And then I can turn monitor off, I can track it on that chain, it's great. Definitely don't be a dingus like me and take literal years to figure out how to monitor with no latency so your artist can actually enjoy tracking chains. The next thing that I want to talk about is a DI and a splitter. I talked a little bit about this in our Justin Bieber video from last week, but I have a pedal board. I'm going to go back to that video that we had last week. And the first thing on my pedal board is this Franklin DI-20. It's a stereo DI box that allows you to basically plug one guitar in, and you can have one output that comes out that is just a DI sound, and then you can have one output that's going to go through any pedals, any guitar amps, any effects. And I use this all the time for guitar. I also use it for my synthesizers over here that are right behind the camera. And what's really cool about this is inside of my recording software, I have the guitar plugged into mic input 10. You can see that I'm getting audio there. That's just my DI. But then this line 6 right here, that's coming out of the pedal board and out of everything. So you can't hear it right now because I'm not monitoring anything. But inside of my DAW, I have a guitar in that is just my DI. So if I monitor, but let's say I want to monitor with my pedal board. I'm running through a JHS Whitey Tighty compressor, a JHS Colour Box V2, a Boss flanger, and a Strymon reverb. So we talked about monitoring chains in the last one. That's really cool if you want to monitor like that. But what's even cooler is I can arm both of these tracks. I can monitor the pedal board, and let's say I want to record a guitar take. And now when we listen back, I have my DI right here. That's literally just a guitar going straight through the DI splitter and then into my interface. No processing. But I have the exact same take that is my pedal board. And doing this makes me not be so precious when I'm using pedals or outboard effects or anything in general, especially if I'm using something really creative like a mood pedal or a hologram pedal where you're kind of getting a lot of happy accidents, but you're not definite on what you're going to get. I'm always taking my DI and I'm always taking my pedal board and I'm tracking both just in case, let's say I have a cool tone, but maybe I want to process it with Neural DSP or with a Fine Classics pedal board, or I want to do something like that later. I want to have the DI just in case. I don't want to be stuck with my pedal board, or sometimes it's not a pedal board. Sometimes I mic up my Fender guitar amp over here. But either way, if I'm tracking something that has outboard processing, whether it's pedal board, guitar amp, Neural DSP Quad Cortex, anything that's going to have processing, I'm also taking a guitar DI. And that just helps me out so much. The Franklin DI box can act as a really good DI box just to give you a clean signal, and then also as a splitter. So it's a great purchase. There's a ton of brands that make them. Franklin Audio has done right by me, so I definitely recommend it. But if you are tracking guitar synths through pedals, invest in a DI box or at least a splitter, and make sure that you capture both. Like, I would just rather have options when I get to the mix. I don't ever want to feel like I'm 100% pigeonholed unless that really is just the vibe of the song. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about that I still don't do as much as I probably should, but something that really was a game changer, is bouncing pretty much all of my MIDI to audio at some point in my production setup. So I use a lot of MIDI. You've seen a lot of MIDI used on this channel before, and there's a lot of reasons that I do this. Reason number one is if you're not using a super strong computer, you're going to free up a lot of CPU by not having tons of virtual instruments, not having tons of processing. If you can just kind of bounce that and bake it all in, you're going to save so much computer power. On top of that, I find that once I've committed it, I don't really keep second guessing it. I don't go back and I don't change a bunch of stuff in Serum or Antutu or Kontakt. I'm not going back and constantly rearranging parts. Once it's bounced, I just consider that like it's there. And so I find myself second guessing a lot less. And then the third reason is that because working with audio just opens up a lot more opportunities. You can do things like clip gain the actual audio source. You can do things like cut silences manually. You can do things like chop it up and rearrange it and resample it. You can do things like reverse sections. But let me show you a couple weird quirks about working with MIDI. One of the main things is, like, let's say you're using a loop-based software like Damage or like any of the Output Arcade stuff. Anything where, like, you hold down a key and it's going to trigger a loop. We have this loop. And loops are cool. But just to give it some context, I'm going to put just a random little guitar sample. This is out of our pack Spark. I'm going to put it underneath just to kind of show you what one of the issues with working with like a triggered MIDI loop is. That's not giving me any issues because I started this at the start of the loop. But let's say we're tracking something on top of here and we want to kind of come in from here. When you're using a triggered loop with MIDI, it's basically always going to start it wherever your playhead is. So even if my playhead's right here, so if you have stuff like that and you're not going back to the very beginning of the loop every time, it never really lines up. So to bounce audio is really simple. I have a shortcut on my keys where I can do Command, Shift, and R, and it's going to render out that audio. But if you don't have that, all you need to do in most DAWs is go to Edit, Render in Place. You can open up your render settings, or you can do things like dry bounce it. You can do with the channel settings. You can run it through your master chain if you want, and then you can do your tail size. So I'm going to add a little bit of tail size. We're going to bounce it in, let's do 32-bit float just in case anything ever clips, and then you can save it with a custom name if you want. But now we can render, and now we have that audio and we have a chain. So now, if we were to start it here, so that's something that's really fun to do. Another thing that you could do is, let's say we want to chop this loop, right? It's really hard to do that when it's MIDI. But now that we've done this, we could literally just make our little cuts. We're going to cut to quarter notes, and I'm just going to change things. It might sound really bad, but it'll get my point across. So now we have this completely rearranged loop. And it's really hard to do that if you're using MIDI. Let me show you one more example. We have this little MIDI chord progression that's just out of our Pop Progressions MIDI pack, and then it's just running through this little key preset in Serum out of Lush called Prom Queen. It sounds like this. It's nice. Once we render it out though, I'm going to find myself playing with this a lot more. So you can do things like you can pitch it up easier and kind of give yourself some cool artifacts. You could speed it up if you want. You could chop it like we did on the last one, but more importantly than that, let's just chop this one little section right here. And in Cubase, I can do something like I can go to Edit, I can go to Functions, Convert to Real Copy, and then I can reverse this. I'm going to hit Control-Shift back, or you can double-click it, go to your process, add a process, hit reverse, and it's going to reverse that little clip. And now what we can do is... let's do the same thing on this one. You can also do bounce if you don't want to convert to real copy. So bounce for me is Control-Shift-B, and then I'm going to reverse that as well. And these are all things that you can't do when you're working with MIDI. So I like bouncing audio. I find that I can get a lot more creative with arrangement. I can get a lot more creative with sound design. I can get a lot more creative with taking what could be a pretty minimal, even boring progression and just kind of spicing it up. So try to render out all of your MIDI into audio at some point in your production process and just see if it kind of sparks new ideas. The last thing that I want to talk about is more just like kind of an overarching principle. We're not even going to dive into a specific example, but every time people send me a mix, especially like we have free stems on our website that you can download and you can practice mixing with, and every time somebody sends me one of them, I almost feel like their mix sounds drastically worse than if you just loaded in all of the dry stems and reprinted it with nothing on it. And I think that that is a massive testament to people are doing way too much on their mixes. I think people are mixing with their eyes. I think people are mixing with just a bank of tips that they have in their head, and they're not problem solving. And one of the things that I think happens is people start over mixing things way too early in the process. I like mixing as I produce, but I've scaled way back over the years because I would have like a vocal or a guitar part or an overhead that would have like these really harsh sounding frequencies, and you start notching those out and everything sounds really beautiful and solo, but then you play the entire mix and the entire mix feels dark. The entire mix feels a little bit stale and one-dimensional and boring. And it's just this concept that I feel like pretty much every frequency in solo sounds terrible. So if you're just listening to things in solo and you have an EQ and you're just doing this for 20 minutes on every single source, you're going to be like, okay, let me cut this. You're going to be like, let me cut this. This is a little bit muddy. You're going to be like, let me cut this. I don't need that low end. You're going to say, let me cut this. I actually don't need any top end up here from guitar. And then you're going to say, now that I've cut that, I'm kind of hearing a weird frequency here as well. You're going to say, I'm going to get rid of that. Then you're going to say, actually, now it's sounding a little dark, so let me boost this. And then you're going to say, you know what? Now there's kind of a weird thing happening here, too. And then you're going to say, now it sounds really dark, so now the mids sound really heavy. And now you've just taken away so much body and life. And maybe these are the right moves in the context of your mix, but you're not going to know that until you get drums, until you get bass, until you get all of your other guitar and key parts, until you get vocals. And so when you find yourself doing this, doing 8, 9, 10, 11 EQ moves, you're doing multiple stages of compression with no kind of target for where your dynamics need to be. You're dialing in reverb times that really have nothing to do with any of the rest of the song. Just because they sound really good when you're doing them, that does not mean that the whole mix is going to come together. And it leads to this common thing where you overmix and you overmix. So now, if we engage all of this, now it sounds dark. So now we need to saturate, and then we start adding things that aren't necessarily needed. If instead we just do kind of general tone shaping, let the whole song come together, and then look at everything and say, okay, what is a glaring issue? So maybe on this, instead of doing all of those weird little cuts, maybe I just say, you know what? It feels a little bit thick. That's about all the EQ that I'm going to do before I start doing any of the other mix. And that's literally just a tone shape. I will add creative things like delays, reverbs, modulation. If I'm going for a really affected sound, I'm going to add that effect early on in the process. But what I'm not going to do is run circles around mixing and mixing and mixing when there's no context to anything. I think that so many people end up doing far worse things to their mix than if they were to just say, okay, I have everything. I'm going to level out everything, get everything in its right spot. And then we're just going to sweeten. I'm going to take a dB here, a couple dBs here, maybe 6 dBs does need to come out of a weird frequency in a vocal. But I'm not doing that until I'm hearing the entire vocal mix. I'm tired of spending hours and hours and hours doing mixing moves that I'm going to end up undoing anyway, probably a couple hours later in the process. So one thing that I will say is try to get all of the elements there before you start working on things like really specific EQ, really fine detailed leveling, really crazy automation, because with every single new element that comes in, that relationship is going to change. That dynamic relationship, that frequency relationship, that stereo relationship, it's all going to change every single time you add one more element. And the last little point that I'll say with overmixing early in the process is I think that it makes you really complacent when you are tracking. So let's say that you track a vocal take and you say, okay, with that vocal take, I'm going to dial in a vocal chain. I'm going to do the thing where I add 6 different compressors. I'm going to notch out 35 different frequencies. I'm going to add 3 reverbs. I'm going to do all of this. And you finally get it to sound okay. I think that if you were to just revisit mic placement, mic selection, singing technique, other issues in kind of the glaring arrangement, you're not going to need to do probably 60% of those moves that you just did because you're kind of overmixing to be complacent with bad tones, bad tracking, bad arrangement, bad dynamics. So rather than just getting yourself in that little, hamster wheel of process, try to take really simple moves, get the whole kind of mix, and then you can kind of paint all the details. Look at it like a painting. You're not going to start painting every single blade of grass before you've laid down where the bed of grass should even be, right? You're going to want all of your main elements. You're going to want all of your subjects. You're going to want your background. And then you can start doing the fine line wrinkles on the subject's face. You can start doing the small little clouds in the sky. That's mixing to me. But with that said, that is all the tips that I want to talk about today. There's plenty more, so if you want to see another video like this, let us know in the comments down below. Again, if you want to win a sample pack, preset pack, MIDI pack, or loop pack from our website, Make Pop Music, all you have to do is leave a comment in the first 72 hours and keep a lookout on our Instagram on Wednesdays for the winner to be announced on our story. Other than that, thanks for watching this video. I will see you guys soon. Much love. Peace.